Ariel Salleh is visiting professor in culture, philosophy, and environment at the Nelson Mandela University, a research associate in political economy at the University of Sydney, and a fellow in post-growth societies at Friedrich Schiller University, Jena. She taught in social inquiry at University of Western Sydney for many years and has lectured widely. Dr. Salleh's transdisciplinary writing is seminal to political ecology as the study of the relations between humanity and nature. Her theorizations of an embodied materialism and meta-industrial labor are developed in two of her books, Eco-Feminism as Politics and Eco-Sufficiency and Global Justice, and numerous chapters and articles. Her critiques of eco-socialism, deep in social ecology, liberal and postmodern feminism have provoked international debate, a theoretical work that is inspired by a lifetime of activism. She co-founded the movement against uranium mining in Australia. The Greens served on the Australia government's Gene Technology Ethics Committee and the International Sociological Association Research Committee for Environment and Society. She is a founding member of the Global Sustainability University based in Hong Kong, a member of several journal editorial boards, and a former senior editor of the US journal Capitalism, Nature, Socialism. It is with great pleasure that I now give the floor to Professor Salleh, who will be talking about ecocultures, holding life on Earth together. So, Professor Salleh, the floor is yours.
Diana, thank you so much. And thank you to the conference organizers and the university hosts for this opportunity to share ideas. And very much looking forward to hearing what others have to say later as well. It seems that the corona situation has actually offered us an eco-feminist breakthrough, because suddenly we realize, the wider society realized, that life itself is what it's all about. So in sociological terms, you might say that the sphere of reproduction has suddenly become visible and prioritized over the sphere of production. This is something we have been trying for a long time. I can say that ecofeminism is an ecoculture that treats ecology and feminism as one politics. And it emerges when the conditions of life in urban or rural neighborhoods are put at risk by the effects of climate change, genetically engineered viruses, mineral extractivism, water privatization, or even electromagnetic radiation. So ecofeminism is a grassroots perspective. And in what I'm going to share with you tonight, well, this morning for you, is very much looking at the early ecofeminist contributions, because in many ways they are most apposite to this corona situation we find ourselves in, the priority on the sphere of reproductive labor. And interestingly enough, one of the most critically important women, ecofeminist women in this, would be Carolyn Merchant, whose paper I actually realized today I had not cited in my lecture for you. But I want to say that she was absolutely seminal, a historian of science, publishing in the 1980 about a study of, you know, the book, The Death of Nature, Women, Ecology and the Scientific Revolution, where she looks at how the notion of nature as a machine rather than an organism arose, and it arose through the witch hunts, which were orchestrated actually by King James of England and Francis Bacon, he's assisting him, and a holocaust of women with midwifery skills, herbal medical skills, and so on. Women were put to death in order to move to this, make this paradigm shift where nature was simply a machine-like, a dead resource, and of course, ultimately indispensable to capitalist productivism. So merchant is, if you like, an angel hovering behind my shoulder while I read you my lecture. Critically important and very strongly cited work she has done. The first part of my talk is called Dissociated Culture. Way back when I was still at school, people used to talk about a famous book called The Two Cultures. It was written by an Oxford Don, remorseful over the fact that academia was seriously divided between the arts on the one hand and the sciences on the other. And decades later, as a sociologist, myself, a mother and environmental activist, I realized though that Snow's dualism was simply one of many endemic to Western culture. The reason why the global capitalist patriarchal mode of production is so destructive of life is that the underlying ontology of Europe draws a sharp line between history and nature. Moreover, a culture of measurement continually reinforces this 1-0 divide, wherein the human is accorded value, 1, while nature is 0, valueless. Moreover, as part of the non-valued sphere, women, children, indigenous peoples objectified as being closer to nature. This old masculinist drive to ranking and measurement reduces all substance to discrete units. Material nature and time itself is reified, even priced. Yet today, jet travel, TV, electronic bank transfers displace and subsume everyday materiality at lightning speed. These taken for granted technologies reconstitute the human experience of time. Even socialists, Greens, global South elites or liberal feminists often take this virtual world for granted as real. So their political solutions to our global crises are self-defeatingly linear. More of the same, business as usual. An eco-culture will understand how living things are joined across time and space, an indwelling structure invisible to the positivist methods of science, a project that prioritizes the eye over all senses. Oblivious to the pulse of life, this alienated form of reason and its instruments cut across nature's intricate score. Consider agroforestry, mining, nuclear weapons, road transport, genetic engineering, where the plan is human mastery, but complex rhythms in nature are disrupted and ecological disintegration results. If Descartes' cogito epitomizes the psychological dissociation of Western culture, the foundational 20th century liberal feminist philosopher, Simone de Beauvoir, replays the solipsism when she writes, "Humanity is not an animal species, it is a historical reality. Human society is an antiphysis. It does not passively submit to the presence of nature, but rather takes over the control of nature objectively in practical action. If this is existentialism, then it's seriously delusional." De Beauvoir's contemporary, the neo-Marxist Herbert Marcuse, was more astute. He recognized the idea of human mastery and control as a myth with very ancient origins. With his Frankfurt School colleagues, he saw the birth of this false rationality in the split of so-called higher faculties from immediate sensuous experience. That historic act of patriarchalism privileged the organ of sight, so as to fix on the manipulable properties of objects. Instrumental mastery over an externalized, objectified world was soon canonized in the binaries of analytic logic, as against experientially sensitive forms of dialectical thinking. De Beauvoir's Parisian nemesis, psychoanalyst Luce Irigaray, put it this way: Western thought has been dominated by the physics and mechanics of solid matter, wherein the feminine sensibility refers more to a mechanics of fluids, such as barely elaborated. As noted, a key outcome of this modernist epistemology was the suffocation of lived time. Under the culture of capitalism, product is given precedence over process. Irigaray linked this specularity, productivism and its commodity fetish, to the old libidinal custom of exchanging women's bodies as goods. So the elimination of time in the rationality of Eurocentric fathers yields knowledge only of a dead world. For the physicist, matter becomes mathematical and topographical relations, events, projections, possibilities. Sensitivity to the flow of nature is sacrificed to the functional operations used in its transformation. In medicine, as we know it, the body itself is reductively imagined as atomic units to be masterfully reassembled at will. Vandana Shiva, an Indian ecological feminist and former quantum physicist, observes this dissociated culture in the hubris of hydrological engineers who would control water flows by stochastic calculation. To quote, "When flood control measures accentuate floods and fertilizer robs soil of its fertility, the problem is not merely between use and misuse of technology. It is rooted in, embodied in, the very process of knowledge creation." Winona LaDuke, activist with the US Indigenous Women's Network, notes that in the culture of American Indian societies, which have no separation of manual and mental labor, all parts of the natural order flow in cycles. Whether those cycles belong to the moon, the tides, our bodies, seasons, or life itself, within this understanding is a clear sense of birth and rebirth and a knowledge that what one does today will affect one in the future. In this culture, a second concept, reciprocal relations, defines the responsibilities and ways of relating between humans and the ecosystem. As one could not take life for food without a reciprocal offering, you only take what you need and leave the rest. Against the one-dimensional reasoning of liberal feminists like de Beauvoir and some of her postmodern political daughters, many more people around the world access another conceptual space. This takes in its goal by concentric rather than linear scan. The object is experienced from several points, kaleidoscopically, as it were. Such knowing rests not on mere appearance, formal visual and measurable properties of matter, but derived from touch or a deeper, diffuse, kinesthetic response to pulse. In this potential ecoculture, time, change, and contradiction are honored. A new definition of objectivity comprehends the whole in all its moments. No interest here in control, vectors, invariant factors, functions, formulae, and expedient significance levels. A knowledge of the texture and tone of material qualities in all their perversity is sought. A communion with the object rather than penetration by technological reason. The effect is an empathic, reflexive logic without incisive categorical boundaries between subject and object. The object, rather, is an object in process, a both and rather than either or. Old Eurocentric dualisms of man versus woman, white versus black, history versus nature, signifier versus signified, are replaced by a metabolism of subject in field. The very body of the noun is dissolved in the liquid realism of non-identity. Elaborating on this theme of subject-object collaboration, historian of science Evelyn Fox-Keller spoke of a gender-free science where nature is known as a subject with a heart of its own and one that pulses through our own body cells. As I always like to remind my friends, humans are nature in embodied form. According to the Canadian midwife and philosopher Mary O'Brien, the capitalist patriarchal consciousness reels back from reproductive creation and flow. Its alienation turns to an obsessive drive for artificial principles of continuity, monotheism perhaps, or the nation state. The legal term incorporation echoes this lack. By contrast, an ecofeminist ethic moves from fixed abstract formulae like rights into an extrapolation of the caring experience. Ethicist Carol Gilligan has described a way of working out responsibilities that integrates thought, feeling, and relational context. This resonates keenly with Australian Indigenous approaches to community governance, according to Aboriginal philosopher Mary Graham. Here is a kind of labour practicing a sense of place, very different from environmental management under the old 1-0 sign. Holding labours open people to a self-consciousness quite at odds with the cogito of the unitary subject. Holding is based neither on separation and control of others, nor some ephemeral cosmic fusion, but on practical deferral, exercised by a strong, decentered subject. Aristotle's law, A cannot equal not A, is inadequate in a living world where A may well be in process of transforming to not A. Further, since caregiving men and women do not have much to do with power and control, they don't project causation as linear. People who work with bodies and ecologies know well how events have multiple determinations at once. Their embodied materialist epistemology rests on a fusion of consciousness with field and a grasp of the impermanence entailed as they shape each other. Part 2, regenerative politics. By the 1-0 logic of North versus South, industrial modernity has turned people into human capital and lands into natural capital, benefiting only international minority class of entrepreneurs and government hangers-on. Under the globalizing economic development model, common land, water, biodiversity, labor, and loving relationships are pulled away from culturally autonomous webs of self-sufficiency. That said, the established academic disciplines captured now by the neoliberal university support this colonizing 20th century mindset. Mainstream feminists, many folk on the left, and some Green New Dealers have confidence that the dominant paradigm can be adjusted. But the ideal of a globally fair and sustainable distribution of the social product makes no thermodynamic sense. As anthropologist Jason Hickel points out, to meet the 2015 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the global economy will have to grow 75 times its present size, even as it already overshoots planetary capacities by 50% every year. Contrast the hands-on management of humanity-nature metabolism among North Indian forest dwellers. I quote Shiva here. She says it is in managing the integrity of ecological cycles in forestry and agriculture that women's reproductivity has been most developed and evolved. Women transfer fertility from the forest to the field and to animals. They transfer animal waste as fertilizer for crops and crop byproducts to animals as fodder. This partnership between women's work and nature's work ensures the sustainability of sustenance. Here is a regenerative, co-evolved social ecology, fully attuned to the rigors of scientific complexity, mind you. Similarly, as I understand it, Australian Aboriginal peoples model an ecoculture which has lasted for over 60,000 years. For them, both farming and hunter-gathering are ecosystem holding. In this most self-sufficient of bioregional economies, the seasonal walk through country is made in the knowledge that with insightful harvesting, each habitat will replenish and provide again on the return. According to the ecological economist John Gowdy, this kind of livelihood rarely takes more matter or energy than is needed. Turning to meta-industrial labour in urban economies, German ecology activist Ulla Terlinden spells out the tacit epistemology of labour at the domestic periphery of capital. She writes, housework requires of women or men a broad range of knowledge and ability. The nature of the work itself determines its organisation. The work at hand must be dealt with in its entirety. The worker must possess a high degree of personal synthesis, initiative, intuition, and flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry? Somebody speaking. Contrast this close empirical engagement with the fragmented industrial division of labour, from the numb, inconsequential mindset of the investor through to the assembly line operative. The US eco-feminist philosopher Sarah Ruddick, who coined the idea of holding, points to more ecocultural parallels between good parenting and good ecological reasoning. To hold, she says, means to minimize risk and to reconcile differences rather than to sharply accentuate. Holding by a man or a woman is a way of seeing with an eye toward maintaining the minimal harmony, material resources for sustaining a child in safety. It is the attitude elicited by world protection, world preservation, world repair. While minimizing risk, often in the face of material uncertainty, such holding is the ultimate expression of adaptability. And while science, as usual, is marred by the positivist separation of fact and value, space and time, a cautious awareness of interconnection is common sense in this embodied materialist reason. Ironically, the exacting empiricism of meta-industrial labour and inbuilt reality testing compares favourably with the most stringent standards of scientific falsificationism. For those schooled in Marxist sociology, the regenerative labours of mothers, grandmothers, subsistence workers might be seen as an unspoken meta-industrial class. This class is absolutely essential to the material basis of capitalist economics. Mm-hmm. Yet capitalist economics is not essential to it. To borrow from the Australian Indigenous elder Jessie Werper, our way of provisioning has good fit with country. While Western civilization is founded on an ancient epistemological violence, splitting humanity from nature, meta-industrial labours at the margins of productivism balance the metabolism of life and earth as one systemic flow. To paraphrase the great Chilean economist Manfred Max Neef, self-managed ecocultures are synergistic. They satisfy many needs at once. They're not only environmentally benign, but creatively social. Besides subsistence, they foster learning, participation, innovation, ritual, identity, and belonging. A high quality of life can be enjoyed on 3 hours work a day. By contrast, the engineered satisfiers of urban industrial societies like cars, computers, bureaucracies cost much energy and time, sabotaging the very convenience they were designed for. To realise eco-sufficiency with global justice, the most effective millennial goal will be to give back land taken from Indigenous and peasant peoples in the name of development. This presents a major challenge in an era like our own, when land grabs for mining, water extractivism and other corporate projects threaten people's livelihoods on every continent. At multilateral summits, the other experience of caregivers, small farmers, First Nations peoples is presented as cultural, not economic, so minimised. This locates their experience and skills outside the white middle-class masculinist government and UN agency discourse. But since the Seattle People's Caucus in 1999, this conventional wisdom has been dual-powered by initiatives like the World Social Forum, Indigenous Environment Network, Via Campesina, and Extinction Rebellion. Our own new book, Pluriverse, has opened into a global tapestry of alternatives, fostering conversations among Swaraj, Ecofeminism, Ubuntu, Degrowth, and others. To support the eco-cultural vision of global activists, political philosophers, green thinkers, ecological economists, socialists, and others need to balance three interweaving goals: ecological sustainability, protecting nature's metabolic value, and the interdependency of species; socioeconomic justice, protecting the well-being of sex genders, ethnicities, generations, and the sovereignty of bioregional livelihoods; cultural autonomy, protecting difference and the rich historical diversity of lifeways on this world. The reproduction of daily use values at the periphery of capitalism fosters life on Earth far more than the sphere of production for exchange. It also embodies an epistemological alternative. As we begin to build a global ecoculture post-corona, can we be guided by this regenerative imaginary? A future ecoculture will be post-capitalist, post-colonial, post-patriarchal, and ecocentric. I believe that once people around the world discover that they themselves are nature in embodied form, then cultural understanding and peace will grow. Thank you.